Good morning, Texas Values listeners and all people in Central Texas. Welcome to the Texas Values Report. I'm Mary Elizabeth Castle, the Policy Advisor at Texas Values, and here I have our brand new Policy Director, Jonathan Covey. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thanks, Mary Elizabeth. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is great that, your first week back in the office, for real, after being quarantined, you get to be on the radio show.
Yeah, it has really been an experience, but it's great to be on the team.
Yeah, that's good. So we've been doing a lot here at Texas Values. It's been a very busy week. We've been busy the past few months, even though we've been working from home. And this week there was a very important Supreme Court case that a ruling came out in the Bostic versus Georgia Clayton County case, actually, that deals with special protections for LGBTQ individuals, but that actually is similar, to some legislation that we defeated last session. And Jonathan will tell you a little bit more about that. And we've also been working on a number of issues at Texas Values. In addition to that, we also have our work at the State Board of Education, and we have a big meeting coming up next week that is very important. And that's why we have our special guest today, State Board of Education member Donna Bahorich. And I'll tell you a little bit about Donna and her background. She's a Houston Republican, and she's developed a reputation as an inclusive leader who's dedicated to conducting the public's business in a transparent manner. During her tenure as a board chair, she pushed for a system that involved more Texans in the curriculum review and revision process, created a free education conference, increased the public's accessibility to instruction materials, and spearheaded the effort to create a new long-range plan for public education. Bahorich is now a member of the board's Committee on School Finance Permanent School Fund, which oversees the country's largest educational endowment and establishes critical financial and auditing policies. We appreciate Ms. Bahorich and her work, and as you know, we have a very important meeting next week. Donna, welcome to the show, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, so the TEKS, we've been talking about them for a while on our radio show, and we've been telling people, in the early process to get on a work group to help review the health TEKS, which are the standards that public school students in Texas will be using to actually learn certain topics like sex education. And so there's a current draft that's going up to the board this upcoming week. Actually, it's probably more than a week from now, June 29th, and people will have an opportunity to give feedback to the board. So I was wondering if you could, just explain to people why they should get involved at the State Board of Education and how can they voice their suggestions to the board?
Absolutely. This is something that's been in the works for a year now. There have been several groups meeting, and the last group was what we call Work Group E. So we've had groups A through E, and we've got their initial recommendation that will be presented to the board, or that has been presented and been out for public review to begin the actual first public hearing on the standards on Monday, June 29th. And that's where we'll be looking at recommendations from the public on what they would suggest be changed, or if there are items missing or errors or anything else that the public would like to comment on what is being presented before the board. So that work group E, which was the last work group to give the recommendation that's before the board, we'll be collecting public feedback on that for the first time. There'll be a public hearing in June. There'll also be a public hearing in September at the September meeting as well. We always have 2 public hearings for every new set of standards that we introduce before approval, final approval.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. If you're tuning in right now, we have State Board of Education member Donna Bahorich, and she's given us great information about how you can get involved. And as she mentioned, you can go testify on June 29th, and you'll have another opportunity, as she mentioned, in September to also give public feedback. Now, Ms. Bahorich, where can people go to actually look at this draft that's going to the board so they can know how to testify and what to testify about at this upcoming meeting on June 29th?
That's very important because general comments are not as helpful now as they are to actually any recommendations on the draft that is before the State Board of Education, which you can find by going to the Texas Education Agency website. And there is a section called Academics. And under Academics, you will have an option that says Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills Review and Revision. And that's all the subjects that are under revision and have been under revision in the past. So if you click on there under the curriculum standards, again, we're looking at the Texas Education Agency website, Academics, and then looking under the curriculum standards, you'll see the review and revision of Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. That's what we call our curriculum standards. We call them TEKS or TEKS. You'll hear some people say TEKS or TEKS. I never know which way to pronounce it. So you go under the review and revision, and under there you will see subject area reviews. And in this case, it would be the health education TEKS review. And under there, and I'm sorry for your listeners, they have to drill down, but I think it'll be pretty easy once you kind of get going. You go to the group draft, the health education group drafts. That's where the actual work is. That is before the board. So I don't know if you have an opportunity to post that draft recommendation, but that'd probably be as helpful as it would to get them straight to the draft recommendations that we'll be looking at. But that's how you get down to that level so you can actually see the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And we thank you for that information. So if you heard that, you can go to the TEA website and navigate that. But, at Texas Values, we always try to make it easy for our listeners to find information. We'll try to provide an opportunity for you to easily navigate and have a chance to look at those recommendations, and we'll try to post those on our website. So you mentioned a little bit about, testimony and what kind of testimony will be helpful at this point, because if you look at the agenda, it says discussion of the health TEKS. So what kind of testimony are you looking for from listeners, and especially from, people who are Texas Value supporters?
Yeah, I think, to look at the various topics we have the recommendation before the board is broken down into physical health and hygiene, mental health and awareness, and healthy eating and physical activity. These are the main areas that are covered under the health standards. Alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, injury and violence prevention, those are, and then reproductive and sexual health. So there are 6 different topic areas that are covered in these standards. And so when folks are looking at these various topics, if they have expertise and have experience and background, like so many that we've heard already testify before the board before we began this work, helping us to look at what's actually being recommended before the board and then make recommendations based on that, how you would change it, edit it, substitute something else that is already being recommended would be most helpful at this time. Instead of a general comment, it's much more helpful to be focused at this moment.
That's great. That's really helpful. So if you're listening and if you're watching our Facebook Live, definitely take that to heart what Ms. Bahorich is saying. You have an opportunity to look at the Work Group E draft and look through those recommendations. And I know we've been focusing a lot on the sexual health and reproduction strand that are kind of near the end of the document that's going to the board. So definitely look at those TEKS. And look at specific things that are in there so you can make your testimony very specific and very effective to the board so you can help them for, when they actually are finalizing these recommendations. And so, that's great to know how your testimony can be effective. And so, how can people sign up to testify?
Yes, if you go to the State Board of Education on the same Texas Education Agency website, the Board of Education does not have a separate website from the Texas Education Agency. We are underneath their website. So anything about the State Board of Education is always found at the Texas Education Agency website. So if you go there, you will see a page, an option under About TEA. It has leadership, and it lists several things. The Commissioner of Education is there, Deputy Commissioners, State Board of Education, as well as the State Board for Educator Certification. So if you click on the State Board of Education link under the leadership of the TEA website, you will see an option that allows you to sign up for public testimony. And it actually just says public testimony registration, and that's where a person can sign up. And you have to, we will have remote testimony this time. It's going to be we haven't gotten the instructions yet on how it will be. I don't think that they're sending in recorded video this time. I believe it is going to be via chat, but we've not received instructions on that. So you'll need to send out notification to people on Facebook about how to if it can be pre-recorded or not. We should know that here pretty quickly. And but that's where you would register.
Okay, that's great. You're hearing, firsthand on our radio show and Facebook Live information about how to testify. And if you remember, Texas Values team members, Jonathan and I actually testified at the last April board meeting through video because of COVID-19 and how that's changed how people were conducting public meetings. So as you heard Ms. Bahorich say, it'll be virtual testimony. This time you will not be sending a video in or testimony in, if I got that correct. And so it'll be conducted in a different way. And so you really want to pay attention. As Ms. Bahorich said, you can go to the TEA website and look for the State Board of Education page to sign up. But definitely keep in touch with Texas Values. Look for our Facebook posts, look for our alerts. We'll be sending out an action alert. Really pay attention so you can learn how to testify on June 29th. So your testimony can be heard and you can give feedback on Workgroup E recommendations for sex ed and health education. So definitely pay attention to us. As I said, you can go to the TEA website to sign up. Ms. Bahorich said those recommendations on how to testify will be coming up in the next few days. So definitely keep track of that, but we'll be here to notify you how to testify and how that be done at the next meeting. So that brings up another topic. A lot of meetings have been changed. Some meetings have even been canceled. Public meetings, in governments and city council and other things. And so how can people actually watch this meeting since COVID-19 will be restricting them for being an audience at the meeting?
We always have our broadcasts are always broadcast, again, on that same State Board of Education page. It will say live and archived broadcast. That's always the way that you can watch the meeting at the same exact time, streaming. But you can also go back and see any archived videos of past meetings as well. And so that's always been up there. And hopefully your listeners will be able to tune in and be able to watch it as it happens. And if not, it'll be posted so they can watch at a later time.
That's great. Yes. So definitely check out the TEA website and the State Board of Education page and click on live stream. However, we at Texas Values always try to make those things available to you. So check out the Texas Values Facebook page, and we're finding a way to actually stream that through our Facebook page as well. So you want to make sure that you watch this meeting so you know what will happen in regards to the statewide health standards that will include sex education. So what happens after this meeting in June? So we're having this first discussion, people can testify. This is the work group E draft, but we know that there are several meetings on the health education standards even after June. So what happens next?
So the June meeting, again, will be our first public hearing. The Board of Education at that point will have further instruction because now we have the draft before us that came from the work group E. We will provide instructions to another work group that will make recommendations that we agree need to be addressed. So we'll have a work group F, if you will, that will be put together to act on board instruction that'll be given at this meeting, and that'll be in part based on public testimony that we hear. And they'll make those changes. We'll have another draft. It'll be work group F draft that will be up for first reading at the September meeting, which is the week September 8th through 11th. And that will be when we actually do a first vote on the health standards. And I think we'll take public testimony there as well. And then when we come back, there won't be any work groups meeting. I don't anticipate any work groups meeting after the September meeting. That will be first reading. And then in November 17th through 20th will be what we call the second reading and final adoption of the standards. So the standards themselves will be approved at the November meeting, and that will be in place for about 10 years typically. Now, obviously, we took a lot longer than that to revise these standards because the health standards that we have now are about 20 years old.
Wow.
They just had not been revisited in about 20 years. They've been a few revisions here and there based on legislative action, but not an actual full revision for quite a long time. But typically it's about 10 years on a cycle that all of the subjects are reviewed. So again, your most impactful help is going to be at this meeting for the June 29th public hearing, and then what the board recommends for the work group F to do, and then at the September 8th through 11th meeting. Those will be the most impactful. Usually when we get to the second reading, the changes that happen are more minimal compared to the other two meetings.
Okay, wow, that's really important, people. It's really important that you testify at this meeting and later on in September. Ms. Bahorich, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this important information of how people can get involved at the State Board of Education and what's coming up with the health TEKS that obviously will be in place for quite a while and have quite an impact on future generations. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, I really appreciate it, and I just really encourage your listeners to at this point, the more specific the comments or the recommendations that you can give the board, because often people will come and they'll say, we don't like this or that, but they don't have a specific recommendation, and that is not as helpful at this moment as giving us some actual details on what the recommended change might be. So really appreciate your listeners, anyone who wants to testify, to give any specific recommendations on the standards themselves that the board might take up would be the most helpful, and that'll help us narrow down any issues that are in the standards that are being recommended.
All right, that's great. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll definitely get people out there to testify.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time.
All right, thanks. All right, so you heard that about the State Board of Education coming up next week and how to get involved, but there's still a lot of issues that we're I guess, working on at Texas Values. And we have Jonathan here to tell you more about the Supreme Court ruling earlier this week that could have huge implications on religious liberty and Christians. And Jonathan, this was an important case. Texas Values actually signed on to an amicus brief for the funeral home in this case. But can you tell our viewers more about the background of the case and what it's about?
Yeah, absolutely, Mary Elizabeth. Thanks for asking. And just before we get started, we have Father's Day coming up, so I wanted to make sure and say Happy Father's Day
happy
to
Father's Day.
all the fathers out there on Sunday. And then, on the Harris Funeral Homes case on Monday, the Supreme Court ruled against Harris Funeral Homes, and in doing so, the court has delivered what has really become a truly troubling decision, saying that unelected officials can effectively rewrite laws, forcing Americans to guess what the law means, including something as fundamental as the definition of sex. So just to give you a little bit of background about how this works, in 2013, a male funeral home director expressed the intent to begin dressing and presenting as a woman at work while interacting with grieving families. And the funeral home director worked at Harris Funeral Homes, the plaintiff in this case, for nearly 6 years and agreed to abide by their sex-specific dress code. Harris Funeral Homes has a professional conduct and dress code to ensure that grieving families, they can focus on grieving families and serving them instead of having them focus on employees. These policies, they aren't really considered to be unusual. In fact, they're consistent with a lot of industry standards. They're consistent with a lot of federal laws. Ultimately, the owner of the funeral home, Tom Ross, decided he could not agree to the funeral home director's plans, and they parted ways. That prompted the funeral home director to file a complaint with the EEOC against Harris Funeral Homes for employment discrimination, and the EEOC in turn sued the funeral homes. The federal government changed its position, and then the ACLU intervened and continued to push for sex to be redefined to include gender identity in federal law. Unfortunately, what we saw last Monday was the Supreme Court ruled that unelected officials and courts don't have the authority to redefine the law. They bypassed Congress and said that sex in Title VII, which has to do with employment law, includes gender identity and sexual orientation. And maybe you could tell us a little bit, Mary Elizabeth, about what this means in terms of practical effects going forward.
Yeah, I mean, this case has huge implications. When they're rewriting the term, sex to mean sexual orientation and gender identity, and kind of like including them in this, federal protections, which actually means that, people will be suing based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So it has huge implications. As Justice Alito said, in women's sports, men who claim to identify as women could compete in women's sports, not even just at the collegiate level, but he said in professional sports. This means like even at work, and this was an issue in Harris actually, men can enter women's restrooms. There's a privacy issue at stake. There's also, issues of religious employers, even those that are not churches. And I know they were trying to say that there was some kind of reprieve, but I mean, there are religious organizations that, couldn't use a ministerial exception. And so that includes us, Texas Values. We're not a church, but we're a religious organization. And so it creates this basically opportunity for these lawsuits and for all these people to have their privacy and to have their rights taken away, their religious liberties taken away by this lawsuit.
And you bring up a really good point talking about Justice Alito, and he wrote a scathing dissent of this opinion too. And one thing he said was the court itself recognizes this, quote, the place to make new legislation lies in Congress. When it comes to statutory interpretation, our role is limited to applying the law's demands as faithfully as we can in the cases that come before us. He's saying that basically what the court did was he's calling them out for legislating from the bench. And to have a justice sitting on the court call out the majority in a case for legislating from the bench is just a really scathing rebuke in some ways. And I think that it really speaks to how off this opinion truly was.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, they're legislating from the bench, and also, I mean, they're rewriting the definition in society of what, sex means, of what gender means, because as you've been keeping up with our work, there are claims that there are more than two genders, and, there are several. So it creates, this redefinition in the law, of course, but also in society to where it can create, a lot of different problems and confusion. And like I said, we actually, filed an amicus brief along with other family policy organizations in this case to stand for Harris Funeral Home. I mean, like you mentioned before, they were, a faith believing organization. They were believers, and they believed what the Bible said on, how God created man and woman. And so it was very important to protect, religious liberty rights and protect people, even in the workplace who have opinions, who can now be sued for sharing those opinions at work or fired.
And we at Texas Values want to continue doing that work and doing it. But in order to do that, we have to raise money as well. So we talk about how people can donate to continue keeping us going forward in this way.
Yeah, absolutely. These amicus briefs aren't free to file, so our work is very important. It takes resources, so it's important for you to donate to Texas Values. And of course, we're saying Happy Father's Day, but we also have a special Father's case at the Supreme Court, Texas Supreme Court, that'll be coming out soon, and so that takes resources as well. So always bless our organization and donate to Texas Values. And thanks for tuning in to the Texas Values Report.